Today I'm really excited to be in front of this plum tree during the harvest season. In this video I'm going to talk about 7 different topics, including the background and history of how this tree got here and a little bit about the tree. I'm going to talk about harvesting the plums, about animals which also eat the plums, about pruning, especially suckers, the branches that grow up from the roots. Then we'll get into propagating the saplings which grow from seed. We'll talk about what climates you can grow plums in, particularly the chill hours requirement, as well as storing the plums in dehydrated or jam form. All right, let's get started with the history. This neighborhood used to be an orchard. This house was built more than 90 years ago, so it wasn't an orchard by then already. And then in 1991, this neighborhood was hooked up to the public sewer lines, and I have a plat map of what it looked like when the property at that time was divided up into 3 lots, so we actually only own that parcel 1, and that's where we garden and live today. There used to be a lot of fruit and nut trees, even though this was a residential area. Not as much fruit and nut trees around here today, but these plum trees I think might be a remnant back from that time. These are Italian prune plums, and I'm going to go ahead and pick one for you right now. In order to harvest, like with most fruit trees, you want to grab this. That wasn't supposed to happen. I broke the twig. As with most fruit trees, you want to lift the fruit upwards until it breaks off of the stem to avoid breaking any of the branches. Sometimes the fruits, you might actually have to pull it downward or at a different angle to just have it break off at the stem instead of pulling it upward. You can see that some of the plums have some sugars that were created to protect it from bugs. You can wipe that sugar right off and it's still good for eating. I've taken the time to polish off this other plum that I just picked, so you can see that this outer protective layer really does produce a different color on the plum. That outer protective layer contains some yeast, so that if you would want to make, let's say, some plum wine with these, then you actually don't need to add a lot of extra yeast, or perhaps any extra yeast at all. It'll be able to brew on its own. These Italian prune plums harvest later in the season than most plums, and they're also the most common plum in this neighborhood, probably because they were propagated from the orchard many years ago. So to show you what this looks like at August 25th, typically I'd say harvest season here begins on August 20th. It's when the greenness turns at least a delightful taste. I like it a little bit green, but then it'll turn a yellowish red once it gets even more ripe. I have a picture of a plum that I harvested about a week earlier, so I'll show that here to show how it's a little bit more greener back then. It's starting to get more ripe now. There's not a whole lot of that green area left. I think these really have a good complex flavor even when it's not fully ripe. Maybe that's because it's grown organically, so that the soil has a lot of those nutrients and minerals. But they're great when it's ripe or a little bit less than ripe, in my opinion. Looks like both of these were pretty ripe, which means that within the next week or so I'll probably want to make sure that I pick this tree clean before the animals get to it. Here on the ground we can see some of the fruit that drops and what it looks like when it drops. You can see that it's not really fully developed. It's not going to taste good at all. It's not going to continue ripening, and there will typically be some fruit that drops like this regardless of the weather or how much water the plum tree gets. But when it doesn't get enough water, you're going to see a lot of fruit dropping like this before it matures. And then the leaves curl upwards when they're asking for more water. This is not from the main shoot of the tree. That one somehow doesn't uptake water as well as this main larger trunk. This other trunk wasn't pruned off in time, and it really took, so we're not pruning it out right now. Maybe we should. Let us know in the comments if you know about plum trees and think we should just cut out this larger branch here. But this is the first year where that one actually started producing fruit as well, so we're thinking about keeping it, even though it doesn't quite stay as healthy as the other part of the tree, at least not yet. I always thought that squirrels and birds possibly even raccoons were going for some of the fruit on this tree, because we'd see some of the fruit knocked down after it's already ripe. And then if I don't catch it in time and put it in the compost bin, then ants will start taking over like this. But I learned recently that that's actually a possum. Here's a nighttime video from a camera that showed this possum climbing up the tree and then a couple minutes later climbing back down. As you can see, the ants really do love the plum tree. You can see them going up and down the bark as well. At times we've also seen aphids on the tree. I don't see any aphids right now. And the ants can damage some of the fruits, but there's usually so much fruit that I'm not really worried about the ants having a few here or there. Cutting forward to the harvest, I did find this one plum that had a grub in it. Another first from this harvest was this interesting pear. Before jumping into the video about pruning suckers, I wanted to show this sapling that I dug up, which shows really well how the roots connect to the sucker. And then you can see the suckers growing out from the roots. I'll share some clips of the suckers here as well. And then I'm going to show you how to prune these. Basically, you want to use a pruner. You should disinfect the pruner and sharpen it each time before use. I can't say that I do that every time or did it this time. But what I wanted to show you with this is how to prune these suckers. You want to make sure that the blade, which is on the inside of the trunk, is the blade that's closer, so it'll get a better cut. And then you just kind of get in there the best you can and give that a snap. And I'm going to go ahead and cut all of these off. Some of them, like these smaller new shoots, really you can just pinch them off if you catch them in time. For stone fruit, while they're flowering is the best time to prune, but you can always prune during the summer to reduce the growth, or prune during the winter dormancy period, maybe around February or March, to spur growth. But the suckers I like to trim out as soon as I see them. This tree in the neighborhood is an example of what happens when you don't prune the suckers. It grows like a bush. You can see there's some fruit on there, but only small fruits for how old the tree is. And then near the bottom it gets very shrubby. I find it easier to propagate plants from those seeds that fall onto the ground that naturally just produce some saplings rather than trying to produce it from root cuttings. Here near a compost bin, you can see that there's some plum saplings that have grown from those seeds. And I've got a video that shows how I replanted some of those into small pots. Here's how I've had the most success with replanting these plum saplings. But if I used a shovel to get each of those areas loose, and then I can move the plum tree without moving its roots at all, so that it's still connected with the dirt. That's usually more successful, and then just fill in some dirt around it. And I like to top it off with a little bit of mulch so that'll hold moisture in. This is how big the plum saplings were when they were all replanted. A couple of those didn't make it. A couple of those I've already given away. And then we have the 2 remaining ones, which are just growing pretty well. I think the best way to talk about the climate that you can grow plums in is just to show this map of the chill hours in the US. Chill hours are temperatures above freezing but below 45 degrees Fahrenheit or 7.2 degrees Celsius. And plum trees, as well as some other types of trees like cherries, require a minimum number of chill hours each winter in order to thrive and produce fruit. On this map, you can see that here in the Pacific Northwest, we do not have any concerns about chill hours. We have the most chill hours available in the country because in this moderate climate, it doesn't go below freezing very often in the winter, but it does keep below that 45-degree temperature for plenty of hours to be able to grow any type of tree that would need a minimum chill hours requirement. The last topic before we show you a clip of just the ducks playing around after digging those plum trees out is about storing plums as jam or as dehydrated plums or prunes. While there are many jam recipes available, I wanted to share this one because it was unique for not requiring any pectin added to the recipe. And you still need to add sugar, as you can see, a lot of sugar. But I found the outcome from this method really tasty, and if we have enough plums left over this year, I'm going to be doing that again. I also mentioned earlier that we would share a tip on dehydrators. So here's what a dehydrator looks like. I think ours looks a little bit like the one second from the left, but there's a lot of different models. You just place the halved plums into the tiered system and you turn the dehydrator on. I like to check on that every day, and after a few days I have some really tasty prunes that will keep for a long time. Now we'll cut over to the ducks. They always come around when there's digging happening.